The language of innovation. First, take your warble and put the burbles inside. A skittle or two should do it. Then fill your warble with Washavi Wimberth and let it stand for a couple of sibyls. Pour it carefully, add limassol and octring to taste, and there you have it, the perfect quad of Mard. What? Language matters. First take your teapot, put the tea leaves inside, a spoonful or two should do it. Then fill your teapot with boiling water, let it stand for a couple of minutes, pour it carefully, add milk and sugar to taste, and there you have it, the perfect cup of tea. Innovation. It's just the same challenge. If we don't have the right words to describe it, we can't really work with it. So this module is about how we work with innovation by looking at some of the language we use. So let's begin with some clear definitions. As we've already seen, innovation is about creating value from ideas. Now, our definition of entrepreneurship is simply the skills and the craft for making this happen. It doesn't happen by accident, and people who are good and skilled entrepreneurs are able to repeat the innovation trick time and again because they've learned how to make the journey. And entrepreneurs, well, they're the people who make innovation happen. Maybe in a startup, maybe inside an organization, maybe as social innovators, but they're all people who make change happen. So innovation comes originally from the Latin. The word means, or comes from in and novare, and that means something new, to make something new, to change. But change, of course, involves different degrees of novelty. We can have fairly small-scale change, doing what we do, but a little bit better. We can do something a little more radical, do something different. And occasionally we can do something disruptive, something that changes the game. Now we can imagine this in terms of a spectrum of novelty, moving, as we've said, from doing what we do better, something we call incremental innovation, through doing something different, what we call radical innovation, right through to something disruptive, changing the game, what we would call disruptive innovation. Of course, this isn't just something that happens in a vacuum. These different kinds of innovation have different kinds of impact. Not surprisingly, doing what we do better, incremental innovation, is going to have a fairly low impact. Its real effect comes when you have lots and lots of continuous incremental innovations. We'll come back to this theme. Radical innovation has a much bigger impact, but it's much more occasional. Doing something different is not something you can do every day. And disruptive innovation, as the name suggests, changes the rules of the game and can have huge and very important impacts, transforming the interests of the company, the enterprise, and sometimes society as a whole. But of course, these impacts aren't achieved by accident. They involve different kinds of risk. Once again, incremental innovation basically involves fairly low risk. After all, we're doing something we've done before, just a little better. Radical innovation, by definition, is doing something different that carries a lot of risks with it. And disruptive innovation may change the rules of the game, but it's a very high-risk option. Well, let's take a look at a few examples just to flesh this out a little. When we talk about incremental innovation, well, the kind of thing that's going on here is essentially doing what we do better. So having the iPhone version 6, 7, 8, whatever, these are incremental improvements on that phone. Or antibiotics, making them better and more specific, that's again incremental innovation. And all the different bits of software we use essentially carry version numbers. They get incrementally better. Now that's very different from radical innovation, which was perhaps the world's first smartphone or the world's first aeroplane, or the shift to online shopping as away from normal retailing. These are significant, different changes, higher risk, higher impact. And disruptive innovation, essentially, the test here is, does it change the game? So Henry Ford wasn't the first innovator in terms of the motor car, but what he did with the Model T Ford was bring the car for everybody. It was a car for every man that every man can afford. That changed the future of transportation. The printing press essentially changed the game, brought mass communication, triggered the Reformation and real change across Europe and the wider world in terms of communication between people. And more recently, of course, the arrival of the internet changed the way we communicate forever. These are not insignificant changes, neither in their risks nor their impact. So, to summarize what we've tried to talk about in this short film, we need to be clear in our language. If we're not, then innovation's just a meaningless slogan. I believe in innovation's a great statement, but we have to be clear what we mean by innovation. Well, working definition for this course, innovation is the process of converting ideas into value. Entrepreneurship is essentially the skills and the craft to make that journey happen. And entrepreneurs are the people who make innovation happen. And as we've seen, we have to think of this in terms of different degrees of novelty, from incremental, doing what we do better, through radical, doing something different, to possibly disruptive, changing the rules of the game.